Okay, so thank you to all the presenters for very comprehensive presentations, and I'm sure it's given you a good background and overview of what we have, how the acre scheme is designed in terms of the general element and the cooperation side. So as my colleagues were giving their presentations, we had a lot of questions coming in. So we're going to try and answer some of those questions now. We will answer as many as we can within the time that we have. So I might go to Dipna first in terms of, there's a few questions, Dipna, that came in relation to the scheme conditions. Maybe you could answer some of those, please.
Yeah, hi. First of all, in my presentation, I mentioned that the specs, the draft specifications was in item 2 on the website, but actually if you scroll down, you will see the draft specifications, and that may answer some of the questions that have come up. There was one question about rare breeds. For rare breeds, do you have to have a registered rare breed in your herd on the 1st of January, or is it sufficient to be a member of a rare breed society? As you will see from the draft specifications, to be eligible for this action, you must be a member of the relevant breed society by the closing date for the tranche application. And that leads me into another question. There was a question there about the 50,000 participants. Now, as Josephine said at the outset, there is 1.5 billion allocated to the scheme over the 5 years, and that will facilitate the participation of about 50,000 participants. And I omitted to mention from my presentation that intake into the scheme will be phased with at least 2 tranches, and that's to spread the workload on the advisors and enable them to have sufficient time for the preparation of the applications, and also for them to prepare the farm sustainability plan. There was also a question there about the farm sustainability plan, and yes, one of the core requirements of the scheme is that a farm sustainability plan must form part of the acres application. Now, there's just one more question. I don't want to take up all the time, but there was one more question about applications on BPS, and that's one of the, well, there's a few of the eligibility conditions there. To be eligible to participate, a farmer must have all lands declared in the applicant's name on the IACS, which is the Integrated Administration Control System, have submitted a valid 2021 BPS application, and then all lands brought into the scheme must be declared in the applicant's 2022 BPS and declared on the applicant's BIS applications in all subsequent years of acres participation. Now, I mentioned about the 2 tranches. So the plan is, and it's, as I said at the outset, this is the proposed scheme, and everything is subject to the completion of all the processes in relation to the CAP strategic plan. But the idea, or the plan is at the moment, is that applications would open, say, like in October for contracts to commence on the 1st of January 2023. But then the second tranche, let's say, will be the same time next year, as in, I mean, obviously we haven't planned that far in advance, but the tranche 2 contracts would start from the 1st of January 2024. So Josephine, I think there are a few questions that I've answered there on the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipna. As you were speaking, Dipna, there's a lot of questions flying in here. So just to assure everybody that we are taking note of all the questions, and we'll provide written answers to those, and we'll have them up on the department website. It may take us a couple of days, but any questions that come in will be answered, even if we don't get to all of them tonight. There's a couple of questions there, Ciara, for the cooperation side in terms of the scheme conditions. There's one in particular, just wondering what an NPI is. Maybe you could provide a short explanation on an NPI.
Yeah, so I haven't got the proper definition there to hand. I don't know if Anne could maybe give a more fluent explanation than me.
Sure, Carrie. Yeah, so an NPI is a non-productive investment, and it's an action that you might choose to carry out on your farm, having discussed whether or not it's appropriate with the CP team in the zone. So the non-productive investments and landscape actions are for the participants in the CP zones. So you'll have a chat with your CP team and your advisor, and you may decide to carry out a particular action and they're primarily there to try and to improve the score on the particular parcel or the field concerned. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a little more information in the terms and conditions, and when the time comes, we will have a list of non-productive investments that you can choose from.
Thanks, Anne. Pat, I suppose on your presentation, you gave a number of examples of different scenarios on different farms, and there's a few questions have come in there, I suppose technical questions. Could you give us the answer to some of those, or just give us a run through your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll just go through some questions that have come in. One question was, what's the maximum area that I will get paid on for the low input grassland action? So for low input grassland, the max area for payment is 10 hectares. There was a question come here about young farmers. So a young farmer who sent in a BPS application for the first time in 2022, the question is, will they be able to apply for acres? So if the new young farmer took over the herd number from somebody else, and that herd number was used to submit an application in 2021, then that farmer will be eligible to apply for acres tranche 1. But if that young farmer got a new herd number in 2022 and submitted their BPS application for the first time, so the BPS application was submitted under that herd number for the first time in 2022, then they won't be able to apply for tranche 1, but they would be eligible to apply for tranche 2. A question in there from a tillage farmer, I presume, clarify the implication for the acres general action catch crops to be able to avail for the exemption from crop rotation and diversification under conditionality. So basically that's would be a GIAC 7 requirement under conditionality from next year on. Okay, so the area selected for the acres action catch crop cannot count towards requirement. Okay, so it wouldn't be counted towards that requirement. Another question, is it possible to select a generation in acres on a parcel that I did not declare in my 2022 BPS? So the answer is no, you can only apply for general actions on land parcels that were included in your own 2022 BPS application. So any new lands that you know you're going to have in 23, they wouldn't be included in your acres contract if you didn't have them in 2022. Another question, how many trees do I need to plant to get tier 2 access, or to be a tier 2, considered a tier 2 applicant? So under the tree planting action, you would have to plant a minimum of 100 trees to be considered an applicant under tier 2. There's some more if you want me to go through them, Josephine, or do you want to pass on to someone else? I can come back to me.
Yeah, we might go to John Carty, and maybe we'll come back to you, Pat, because there's still questions coming in there. There's a lot of specific technical questions. So, yeah. John, in terms of your presentation on the corporation side, there's a number of questions have come in. Maybe you could address some of them.
Yeah, thanks, Josephine. There was a number of questions. First one, I see, is it my advisor or the CP team that scores the land? So for commonage land above 10 hectares, the CP team will be scoring that land. But for all other lands within the CP zone, your advisor will be scoring the land. Next question there on CP zones. Who decides the actions to be undertaken on the CP land? The advisor you engage with on day 1 this year will go through the application with you and decide which non-productive investments are suitable on your NPI, on your CP zone land, and whatever general actions could be chosen on the land outside the CP zone. As I explained, there's the possibility of an extra €3,500 in non-productive investments. They will be decided next year between the farmer and their advisor. What's the maximum? Next question is, what's the maximum payment rate in the CP zones for CP applicants? There, as explained, there are a number of different elements to the cooperation, acres cooperation. The first is results-based payment, where there's a maximum of €7,000. And then there's an extra additional €3,500 on top of that in non-productive investments and landscape actions. Another question, will all land in the CP zone have to be scored irrespective of the size of the farm? Yes, all land within the CP zone will have to be scored. And a few other general questions have been answered already. That's it, Josephine.
Okay, thanks, John. John Muldowney, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I guess I can come in there. Like, I guess there's a few questions I've seen floating around of people asking about appropriate assessment. Like, I guess the key point here is the CAP strategic plan has had an SEA done and an AA that has looked at all the actions that are within the acres scheme, and that they're screened. And that's the piece that we're just currently finalising off in terms of final approval of the CAP strategic plan. So until that's completed, like, there may be slight amendments to the overall program that we have on the detail. The local action plans that Ciara referenced on the CP areas, they'll be screened in their own right with appropriate assessment, and that's a process that we'll get to. I suppose also then just building on John Carty's point of who's scoring the lands, in terms of it's still your advisor that you engage with. The important issue there is the whole local action plan in the CP area. It's about bottom-up engagement with farmers on the ground. You know, the key issue here is that agriculture is a key part of delivering for biodiversity. So the teams will be working with farmers and advisors on the ground to try and enhance the understanding of the conservation objectives that are there on that, to try and build up a greater understanding and innovation, in particular on the results-based scorecards. And I've seen a number coming as well in around results-based scoring. So maybe Pamela would like to just, again, I guess, describe what's required of a farmer in results-based scoring, in terms of what does it mean in terms of how they manage their land.
Thanks, John. Yes, I've seen some of the questions come in there, and there was a particularly in relation to that question, there was a query about their holistic grazing plan. What we're looking for with the results-based is the environmental support of the grassland. So typically this would be supported by a more extensive grazing practice with lower artificial inputs and lower herbicide use. So typically a more extensive grazing pattern will lead to the diversity in the structure of the field itself. So there'll be some tussocky areas, some more open sward areas generated by this, and this will also let those indicator plants come in. So I also saw a question there about they wanted some examples of the indicator plants. For the scorecards that have been developed for grassland and peatland, the low input grassland and the low input peat grasslands, those scorecards are all actually available in the draft specification on the website right now, where the indicator species are listed under section A1 and A2 of those scorecards. So if you want to have a look at the specification, you'll be able to see them there. And there was also a question about introducing or planting the positive indicator species. This is certainly not the way to go. So we're hoping, and what we're trying to incentivize this way is appropriate grazing or management practices that will let the indicator species that already exist in the seed bank to come out and flower within the parcel. And in fact, by introducing or planting indicator species, even though you think you may be doing well, you might actually be causing damage to the parcel, leading to a reduction in the overall score. So we certainly wouldn't recommend planting anything and allowing the indicator species to flourish through your management practices otherwise.
Thanks, Pamela. And there is another one then, you know, when we think about managing, I guess, extensive grasslands, people also think about rare breeds. And there's quite a number of questions about you know, when do I need to have rare breeds for accessing tier 1? What's involved with it, number of livestock units? So maybe Aidan, you'd go through that a little bit in more detail.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, so look at it, I suppose, I know it was touched on there by Dimna. I suppose the main requirement is at the time of application that you're registered with the Breed Society. And I suppose then the main eligibility criteria for the Rare Breeds Action is that you make a claim for at least 0.1 livestock units per year for that action. So in other words, you need at least a yo, I suppose, to make an eligible claim. And then there is other requirements in there under that specification, in that you need to produce at least one registered offspring by the end of year 3 to be eligible and to remain eligible for that action. I suppose, John, maybe just to address a couple of the questions maybe that's there on from the commonage point of view. I see just a couple of questions on the first one there, I suppose, just that springs is if commonage is added for the first time to a person's BPS application in 2022, will that qualify that person for tier 1 access? And I suppose the answer to that is no. You needed to have at least 0.5 hectares of commonage in your 2021 BPS and continue to farm that in 2022 and the remainder of the contract in order to get tier 1 access for tranche 1 of the scheme. Another one there just on the commonage. So if you max out your payment on the commonage land, do you need to score the other lands in the CP area? And I suppose the answer to that is yes. All of the owned forage lands in all of the owned CP forage lands will be scored. And I suppose the reality is, in a way, you don't know that you will max out your payment on the commonage, because the payment on the commonage will be a results-based payment. So that will be based on the results of the score of that, and that assessment will take place in the summer of 23. Just another one on taking general actions on commonage lands, and I suppose the short answer to that is you can't take any general actions on commonage lands. The only exception to that is the Rare Breeds Action. So in other words, you can avail of the Rare Breeds Action on commonage land, because there are some of those breeds, as maybe Pamela touched on, that would be suitable for those lands. And just finally, maybe just on the commonage one, if they have enough commonage lands to max out the payment, do they still need to complete a farm sustainability plan? And the answer to that is yes. So every farm sustainability plan will have to be prepared for by the advisor, and that's so regardless of what you max out your payment, or what you may think you max out your payment on. So that's a couple on the few questions on commonage, John.
Thanks, Aidan. Pat, I've seen a couple of questions come in about the various watercourse layers and what actions you can select beside those. So maybe you could clarify, I guess, the possibilities about contributing to improving water quality that are available to farmers.
Yeah, so the riparian buffer margin actions, or riparian buffer zones, they can be selected along any watercourse. It doesn't have to be mapped as on an OSI map. If it's identified as being a high risk pat flow on the PIP maps that the EPA have provided, and those maps are available to the advisors on the land system, where they will be creating the farm sustainability plans. So it can be a surface drain, it can be a watercourse. If there's a risk of sedimentation loss and it's identified on those pollution impact, those PIP maps, or any other watercourse that's marked on the OSI maps, then they can apply for that riparian buffer. There's a few other questions there have come in as well. So for the action extensively grazed pasture, it states that the field cannot be topped or mown between the 15th of March and the 1st of July. And just the question was, can the field be cut for hay or silage after the 1st of July? And the answer is yes, it can. So it's different. People are thinking our low input permanent pasture from Gloss, you weren't allowed to cut hay or silage, but under this action, extensive grazed pasture, you may cut it for meadow after the 1st of July. Another one there, can a farmer with a stocking rate of greater than 170 kgs of organic N per hectare apply for the acre scheme? So that'll be farmers, a lot of them will have nitrates derogations. So yes, they can apply for the scheme. They're not prevented from applying for acres. A question that mandatory to do actions on land that is designated as Natura, SAC or SPA. And the answer to that, no, it's not mandatory to undertake any of those actions. But if you want to be considered a tier 1 applicant because you have Natura lands, then you must select one of the appropriate actions in those parcels. Okay, so you won't just get tier 1 priority access for having Natura. You must select one of the appropriate actions on that Natura area. There was a question there, can a riparian buffer zone be selected on a parcel that was declared as wild bird cover in the GLOS scheme? So if the parcel was wild bird cover in 2022, that is the year of application, you can select riparian buffer zone, but it's riparian buffer zone arable is the action you must select. You could only select riparian buffer zone grassland in fields that were declared as grass on the year of application, which is 2022. So there is distinct differences between those two. They sound very similar, but riparian buffer zone grassland is a different action to riparian buffer zone arable, just to clarify that. So if the field was a grassland, it would be the grassland one you would choose. Another question there, what is low input peat grassland, and must this field be soil tested to verify that it's a peat grassland? And the answer to that, low input peat grassland is a results-based action similar to low input grassland. And no, you don't have to take a soil test to verify that it's a peat soil. This action is targeted in areas that are close to designated raised bogs. And we've identified a 500-meter buffer around these designated raised bogs. And your advisor will be able to see in the Farm Sustainability Plan portal whether your land parcels fall within this buffer zone. And if they do fall within that 500-meter buffer zone, you can select that action. So that's kind of it for now. I'll go through, I'll have a look, see if there are more questions. Maybe if you could come back to me, John and Joseph.
Okay.
Thanks, Pat. There are a few questions there around the cooperation measure, specifically around the payment rates, asking is the maximum payment rate 7,500. Maybe John Carty, could you explain just a little bit around the results-based payment, the NPIs and the landscape actions, just to differentiate between them?
Yeah, thanks, Josephine. As explained, the cooperation scheme element is different to the acres general. It's a new departure for the department to launch essentially a results-based scheme like this, and it's based on a number of years of trial work in various other schemes, such as the REAP scheme, Hen Harrier program, Pearl Mussel project, the Burn program, etc., whereby they have used results-based payments to incentivize farmers to improve the quality of their habitats and therefore get increased payments. So the structure of our scheme is built alongside the learnings from those various schemes over the years. So the first element of the scheme is the results-based payment, and what we mean by this is the land is scored from, as I explained, on a score of 1 to 10. And there's a payment allocation for each particular score. So the higher score you get from 1 to 10, the more higher payment per hectare. So there's a maximum payment there of €7,000 overall. So that does depend on the score of your land. So the higher score the higher score you get on your fields, the higher payments you get. But we have extra and additional payments called, I think it was explained earlier by Joan, non-productive investments and landscape actions, where those two elements allow farmers with poor scoring land to put in certain actions on their holdings that will improve the habitat score of those fields. We're currently working on a list of these non-productive investments. In the current scheme for general actions we have 29, but for non-productive investments we hope to have a list of at least double that, 50 or 60 roughly in total, and possibly more, and they will cover a wide range of actions that farmers can apply for and get paid for that will ultimately help to improve the water quality and the habitat quality of their land. There'll be a payment rate. These actions will include, generally speaking, the list of general actions that we have at the moment, plus a range of other ones, such as, for example, paying for solar powered pumps, troughs, mixed clover swards for silage, conservation friendly mowing, ponds, scrub management, rhododendron and knotweed removal, etc. And farmers will be paid for their time and effort and labour, and for extra works involved in completing these particular actions. So there will be 60 or 70 at least of these actions that a farmer can choose in conjunction with their advisor in next year in 2023. That they will have a budget of 3,500 to pick these actions from. So the total payment per year will be up to 10,500. Thanks, Josephine.
Thanks, John. We have a number of technical questions, I suppose, still coming in. There's one asking, do you need a nutrient management plan like in GLOS? And I suppose I can answer that. So you don't need a nutrient management plan for acres, but soil sampling will be part of the farm sustainability plan. I think there are a few more technical questions. I don't know, Pat, do you want to comment on any more of them? And there's also a comment there, Anne, in terms of details on the CP teams. I don't know, do you want to give just an overview of the details and when they'll be available?
Yes, so Ciara mentioned in her presentation that the details of the CP teams will be made available in the next, well, it'll be probably early next week. The CP teams are establishing themselves at the moment, so they're just getting their office and their admin set up, so that's why there's just a small bit of a delay on that. So thank you, Josephine.
Okay, thanks, Anne. I think, Pat, were you going to come back in there?
Yeah, just a couple there that have come in. So there was a question, a parcel that was environmental management to fallow in the GLOS scheme, could that be selected for low input grassland? And the answer to that one is to qualify for field to be eligible for low input grassland, it has to be a forage parcel in the year of application, so 2022. So if it was declared as an arable crop in your BPS in 2022, it will not be eligible. And that fallow action would be considered an arable crop, so that would rule that parcel out. Question there, if a farmer selects the 500-metre grass margin grassland action, 500 metres of that action, a 2-metre width, would you be considered a tier 2 applicant? So just selecting that on its own won't necessarily make you tier 2, but if you had a whole farm stocking rate of 130 kgs of organic N per hectare or above in 2021, or you're a tillage farmer with more than 30 hectares of arable crops in 2021, and you selected at least 500 metres of either the grass margins grassland action or the grass margins arable action, you would be considered a tier 2 applicant. But I suppose, just to be clear, there's no guarantee that every tier 2 applicant will get access to the scheme. It will depend on the demand and the number of farmers that would be eligible to be considered tier 2. So I suppose it gives you a better chance of getting into the scheme, but it doesn't give a guarantee. That's it for now, Josephine.
Okay. Thanks, Pat. John Muldowney, are there any other questions that you've seen coming in there?
Yeah, I just seen a bit of a reference to carbon credits, and I suppose the acre scheme, you know, in terms of where we're at the moment, it's running completely separate to any carbon credit purpose that would be out there. You know, carbon credits will be looked at completely separate when and if they arise. There is, of course, elements of the acre scheme that do contribute to reducing emissions. Pat has spoken about the low input peat grassland in terms of trying to reduce the management intensity of peatland, of grassland that's on peat. That will help to reduce emissions there. I know the CP teams as well, in terms of their local action plans, they'll be looking at in terms of better blanket bog management to try and restore biodiversity, which will contribute also to reducing carbon emissions that are on peatland. You know, so like a lot of these ones, there's synergies between multiple actions in terms of what we're trying to achieve with acres. And in the design of acres as well, we've been trying to think of all the various policy objectives that are coming through, whether that's for water quality targets, biodiversity targets, climate targets, reducing ammonia emissions in terms of what is feasible within that space. I suppose one of the key points then that's within that is, while we're not asking for a nutrient management plan within the acres farm sustainability plan this time around, we still are asking for soil samples to be taken by spring of 24. So like ultimately we feel that those soil samples will still be very important in trying to inform the nutrient management strategies that are on those farms and contribute to higher nutrient efficiency at farm level. I guess one that maybe Pat has been partly feeding into there is the low input grassland and extensively grazed pasture. I guess there's a number of questions there asking for clarification between the two. What are the key differences on that? So maybe Pat or Aidan, you want to elaborate the key differences that are there between those two actions?
Yeah, I suppose, look, the main difference, okay, low input grassland is a results-based action. So you're not told you can't do this, you can't do that, but your field is scored, and as Pamela went through, the payment you will get for that parcel will depend on the score you achieve. So it's up to the farmer to decide whether he reduces inputs or how he grazes the field to improve that score. With extensively grazed pasture, it's what we call prescriptive based action, where you are given a list of requirements or rules that you have to comply with. Okay, so there would be a limit in the amount of fertilizer you could apply in that parcel, artificial or organic nitrogen. The use of pesticides, for instance, would be prohibited. Again, as I said earlier, you can't mow or top the field between a certain period. So again, that's a prescriptive action, and low input grassland is results based. Just in relation to low input grassland as well, there is you can apply for an additional €50 bonus if you don't cut that field for meadow until after a certain date. So that's optional to apply for that €50 bonus.
And Pat, could you further explain how the farmer will get the land scoured? You know, when does he do it? Who tells him? You know, what can he anticipate to happen next year if he selects that option?
Yeah, so what's planned is we will develop an app for submitting the scorecards. Okay, so any parcel that you select low input grassland on, a request for a scorecard will be sent out through this app to your advisor. So your advisor's phone number will be registered. They will have to download this app, and they will get a request to submit the scorecard through the app. So the advisor then will have to arrange with the farmer a suitable date to walk the field. And it will be very important that there is communication between the farmer and the advisor, because if that parcel had been recently mown, it would be very hard for the advisor to score that field, to identify the species. So it's very important that the farmers, in communication with the advisor, select an appropriate date during the summer months to score the field. So the advisor basically, he walks across the field in a W shape to get a reasonable representation of the field, and it will score the field on their phone and submit that scorecard. And the scorecard will come into the department, and then the payment rate will be whatever the score is, will decide the payment rate for that parcel, and that payment rate at the appropriate area will result in the payment.
Thanks, Pat. And Aidan, there's a couple of questions keep coming in around the organic farming. Again, it's the when and how that brings you up to tier 1 and what's involved in that. And I guess the compatibility with various acres actions in terms of how farmers might be looking at it, because I guess that's an important thing, how farmers might look at those in combination together. So just maybe a few pointers on that.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose it is an important one. So in order for that avenue, we'll say, to gain your tier 1 access, if you're registered with the organic control body and have an organic license by the time of by the date of your closing date of application for acres, that will gain you tier 1 access into the acre scheme. I suppose it's important, I suppose, to point out there is certain area-based actions in acres where in the general side where there can't be an acres payment made on if you're in the OFS payment. So I suppose it's important to point out that Appendix 6 of the draft specification that's there on the website on points, I suppose it goes down through each of the actions that are there and shows you the linkages and the dependencies there on the payment. So there is a lot of payments or a lot of actions there in acres in the general acre side where you will be able to get paid both organics and acres payment on. So things like the linear and point actions like planting trees, planting hedges, coppicing, laying, those actions are all payable by acres to an organic farmer. But I suppose just if you, I suppose it's best to maybe direct to Appendix 6 on the draft specification that's there on the website for more detail on that.
Thanks, John. There's a couple of questions coming in about the results-based approach, and I suppose what we think that the average score might be in acres on results-based fields. So maybe, Pamela, if you wanted to make a comment on the results-based and the scoring and who scores.
Yeah, I think one of the colleagues has covered 2 scores, so it'll be the advisor that's scoring, and in the CP areas it will still be the advisor scoring, but with support from the CP teams. In terms of when they're scored, we know that there will be a challenge, of course, with the pressures of time to get all the fields scored, but that will have to involve a little bit of time management and discussion with your clients to make sure that you can get out and survey them at the appropriate time. Sorry, Josephine, what was the other part of the question there?
Just what score, say what average score do we anticipate in acres? Yeah.
So we've costed the results-based actions at an average score of 8. We are aware that there will be a whole range of scores ranging from very low scoring up to the high scoring fields within that. And based on the experience of the REAP project, we found that a lot of parcels will be scoring initially around the 6 mark. Now, those scores, of course, will be able to go up or down depending on how the participant decides to manage their parcels over the course of the scheme. And the parcels will be rescored in years 1, 3 and 5 as well. So it will be monitored throughout the lifeline of the scheme.
Okay, thanks, Pamela. Are there any other questions that anyone would like to answer, or any key messages that you would like to say to the audience? Because I think we've run over our allotted time, so we might just answer 1 or 2 more questions and then we might try and finish up.
Josephine, if you can hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Mark.
Great,
Yeah.
great, back on. Just on the question of your advisor, just a couple of key points. Your advisor must be on the FOSS list and must have undergone acres training. And there, I see 1 or 2 questions about advisors setting up on LAM and so on. We have 480 advisors, and we'll have up to 700 set up now within the next week or two. The advisor, your advisor must have cleared all this, and you must have created the link between yourself and the advisor so that the advisor can act on your behalf. I suppose any further questions on advisor links or access to the system, the best way to deal with those is through our email, acres@agriculture.gov.ie. There's just 1 or 2 other things that I've picked up on. There's questions there about if I lose land during the course of the acres contract. The expectation is that if you take land in at the start and you're putting acres actions on that land, that you'll have it for the 5 year. So it is a 5-year commitment. And there's a question about what happens if I sell land. The acres contract is reviewed at that point, and potentially there can be a clawback of money paid on that has been paid for an acres action on that land. So just to be aware of that. There is a force majeure option in there, but the general principle is that you need to have the land for the full term of the contract. That's just one question. And one other question was, can I bring in extra land? If you're declaring extra land on your BPS 2023, we'll say, or 2024, the answer to that is no, you can't bring in that extra land. What you're declaring at the application stage, you're committing to maintain for the duration of the contract. So you can't bring in extra acres actions on that land over the course of the contract. Okay, they're just a few questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. I guess one that I was just picking up there, and maybe just to be quick about it, like at the moment, the CP teams are in action in each of the 8 zones. They are starting to draft out local action plans. The local action plans will set out the conservation objectives for each of the 8 zones in terms of what are the priorities. So it might be a hen harrier, or it might be species-rich grasslands or high-status water bodies. And depending on the priorities that the zones identify, they'll be setting out a list of possibly up to 50 additional non-productive investments. And again, we've described some of those, and those will be listed and screened within the local action plans, and they'll provide additional opportunity, as John Carty has pointed out, to raise the farm payment in terms of what you want to do on your farm to try and contribute to environmental goals that are there. And it's the CP teams that help to coordinate, I suppose, the types of actions that are available. We'll train up the farm advisors in terms of selecting those. So for year 1, it's the results-based scoring to be done on your land. And then once that's done, it will be identifying further non-productive or complementary actions that can be done to try and address any threats or pressures that are on the, I suppose, the scored habitat on your holding, and addressing those to reduce that damage or impact and help increase the score. So like, it's over time, this will start evolving more and more, and they will have local, I suppose, engagement committees to engage with farmers and interested parties in terms of developing those local action plans. So this will be an iterative process in terms of further engagement and complementing the existing general actions that are there. So this is a work in progress as we move on in this space.
So I think we'll finish up there. I'd just like to thank the 6 presenters for very informative presentations. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for attending our farmer information meeting. And thank you for sending in all your questions. We are recording the questions, and we will provide written responses, and we'll put them up on the department website. So thank you, everybody. And I think we'll finish up there for tonight.